think we're ready to get started. Thank you all for joining us for NatureTalks, Shorebirds and Sangria. My name is Paula Noel, and I'm the Program Director for New Brunswick with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. I'd like to start by stating that we respectfully acknowledge that the work we do across the country is on traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities. In particular, we'd like to recognize that the Johnson's Mills Shorebird Reserve, which we will virtually visit today, is located on Mi'kmaq territory of the Fort Folly First Nation. We also acknowledge that Indigenous communities are the original caretakers, and we are thankful for the ongoing work, presence, and knowledge of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. It is hard to believe, but the Shorebird and Sangria event is in its 11th year this year. In previous years, we would gather together on the shores of the Bay of Fundy at Johnson's Mills with our supporters to share stories and raise a glass and, of course, watch the incredible phenomenon of thousands of shorebirds moving together as though they were one enormous creature. In the age of virtual events, we're thrilled to be able to bring this event to NCC supporters across the country. So I hope you can sit back, maybe grab a glass of sangria, and join us for our event this evening. Excuse me. The video that you saw playing at the start, if you joined in right at the beginning, was footage that's taken from Johnson's Mills Shorebird Reserve on the Bay of Fundy in New Brunswick. Myself, I grew up on the Bay of Fundy near St. John, but like many people here, I was not aware of the global significance of the shorebird migration that happens like clockwork every year until I started working in conservation. For those less familiar with our work, the Nature Conservancy of Canada is a national charity and land conservation organization. Our mission is to protect and restore Canada's most important natural areas and the species they sustain. Johnson's Mills is one site among thousands across Canada that has been conserved by NCC with the help of partners and incredible donors. Every summer, the Bay of Fundy, famous for its powerful tides, hosts massive flocks of shorebirds on their journey from the Canadian Arctic to South America. It becomes the stage for one of nature's greatest migrations, as its mudflats and beaches serve as temporary stopover for birds numbering in the hundreds of thousands. That is an incredible number, and our speakers today will provide a glimpse into this amazing natural wonder. I'd like to start by thanking our NatureTalks speakers, Gary Donaldson and Miriam Jostrov, for being with us today. Gary and Mary will be sharing some information on this annual cycle of migration, the global significance of the Bay of Fundy, and how conservation in Canada is connected to critical work being done in South America to protect these tiny birds. Our first speaker is Gary Donaldson. Gary is an emeritus member of the Western Hemispheric Shorebird Reserve Network Hemispheric Council, which he'll tell us a little bit more about. And Gary is based in Sackville, New Brunswick, where he has a front seat to the shorebird migration through the Bay of Fundy every year. Of course, with the exception of this past year, Gary would travel to the Arctic with students on ice and Adventure Canada each summer. And so I'm going to turn it over to Gary so that he can tell us a little bit more about the Canadian portion of this phenomenon.
All right, thanks very much, Paula. And you'll see my title here is It's Not About Shorebirds, which seems like a really cheeky title for this event, but bear with me and hopefully you'll understand where I was headed with that. So very early in my career with the Canadian Wildlife Service, my very first job was as Canada's WISRN, which is the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network Coordinator. Early in the early days of my job there, George Finney, who was the Canadian Wildlife Service Director here in Sackville at the time, but also one of the founding members of WISRN, as we affectionately call the network, came into my cubicle to talk to me, and he said, "You know, Gary, WISRN really isn't about shorebirds. It's really about people." And then he just sort of left, and I was sort of left scratching my head, and it took me a little while to figure out what he was talking about, but thankfully I did, because I think his advice was really quite sound. And while my title is not about shorebirds, it really is a bit about shorebirds. So my talk will go into a little bit of information about shorebirds. And really early on, the question about where did shorebirds go? And if you think about the Bay of Fundy, it's a hotspot for shorebird migration. They come here in huge volumes and then they leave. And the sort of obvious question is, where do shorebirds go? So in the early 1980s, the question was kind of like, we're not exactly sure. So what happened was two Canadian Wildlife Service biologists, Guy Morrison and Ken Ross, flew the entire circumference of South America to figure out where these shorebirds were going. And they discovered these, and I use discovered in sort of air quotation marks, these concentration sites for shorebirds, and realized, hey, we need to really make sure these sites are protected because these birds rely on these sites for their survival. But another approach to flying the coast of South America would have been asking the people who actually are in those countries in South America what they know about shorebirds. But at the time, that's not the way we did business, unfortunately. So today, recognizing the need to protect those sites, the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network was formed, and since the mid-1980s, it's gone from having no sites to now 111 sites in 18 countries with 422 partners, conserving 38.6 million acres of habitat for shorebirds, which is a really quite an astounding feat when you look back on it. And the Bay of Fundy has sort of been a key element of that network. It was first designated in 1987 as the only second site in the network. So we like to say that the Bay of Fundy really made the network a network, because a network with one site isn't much of a network. And that first site was at Sheppity Bay, where Johnson's Mills is, of course, and where the Canadian Wildlife Service also has a key site at the Sheppity National Wildlife Area, or at Mary's Point, just across the bay. Recently, we expanded that site to include other important areas that we've discovered are key for shorebird migration in the bay, and that includes Cumberland Basin and Cobequid Bay that you can see in yellow on the map that I have up right now. And it's really important to note that while the wizard sites are based on what we know about numbers of shorebirds using the sites, the key to success at these sites, because they're not legally protected, are the partners that are involved. And certainly the Nature Conservancy has been a key partner in the establishment and the development of the wizard site in the Bay of Fundy, along with other key partners like Ducks Unlimited and Birds Canada, and a number of others that I didn't include on my slide, but Indigenous organizations in the provinces have also been heavily involved. So here's a great map of the Bay of Fundy, but what does it actually look like? So here's a couple of quick pictures of sites around the bay. It includes Sheppity Bay. This image here is of our site across the bay from Johnson's Mills at Mary's Point. On the other side of the bay, in the Minas Basin, this is basically what it looks like. The picture here is of our Boot Island National Wildlife Area. Then Cumberland Basin, which was recently added to the Bay of Fundy site. Here's an image there, which is taken at Sackville, where I'm living right now, and Cobequid Bay as well. So why do we have a wizard site in general? And really, it's all about the Semipalmated Sandpiper migration. It's long been recognized that large numbers of these birds arrive every sort of mid to late summer and spend some time getting prepped for the next stage of their migration. where they're coming from is really interesting, that they breed in the low Arctic, sort of in a strip just above the tree line, right from Alaska through the Yukon Territory, Northwest Territories, Nunavut, northern Quebec, Nunavik, and northern Labrador in Nunatsiavut. And they breed in these tundra habitats near water, but not necessarily on the shoreline. So they can breed quite far inland. And then you'll probably hear a little bit more about where they winter in the next presentation. But where they head from the Bay of Fundy is generally across down to Central and South America, with most of them concentrating in northern South America. So while they're actually here in the Bay of Fundy, they're really just fueling up for their next hop on their migration. They've arrived from the Arctic a little bit fuel depleted, and they are here to basically fatten up. And that fattening might increase their weight from 40% to 50%. And what they're eating are basically mainly two different things. One is a little shrimp-like organism we like to call Chorophium, which I think one of the really interesting elements of their presence in the Bay of Fundy is that they're actually invasive species that were introduced by early explorers to the region. So this particular species of Chorophium occurs here in the Bay of Fundy, but also in France, where Samuel de Champlain left when he was doing his explorations of North America. And then the other element of food that the shorebirds are eating are what we call biofilm. It's basically a layer of bacteria and diatoms that exude mucus. It's quite gross from a human perspective, but quite nutritious from a shorebird perspective. And the amount of biofilm available allows the shorebirds to fatten up, to give them the fuel they need to make their migration. But as they're here fattening up, one of the key elements for their survival is that they have rest when they're not feeding, because when you're not feeding and you're active, you're burning up fat, and that's fuel you might need for your migration further on. So it's really key that these birds find places at high tide when their food is not available to rest, and find a place where they're not being disturbed by either natural elements like recovering peregrine populations that might be harassing these birds, or human-induced disturbance, which might be in the form of people walking on beaches or developments along coastlines. And certainly in that resting period, safe places to roost are really important. So that's where places like the Johnson's Mills Reserve and the Shepparton National Wildlife Area are key to ensure that these birds have safe places to build up their reserves. So this habitat is critical, and birds need to be able to find where those safe places are. So not only in those two reserves that I mentioned are birds hopefully going to be finding refuge, but elsewhere all around the upper Bay of Fundy. And having that rest in a well-fueled shorebird is really essential, because their next job once they leave the Bay of Fundy is a non-stop 40 to 60 hour transoceanic flight that they need to sort of carry out, make sure they're getting across the ocean, avoiding hurricanes, flying through hurricanes, whatever weather is sent their way, and then making sure that they have the similar safe habitat like they have now in the Bay of Fundy when they arrive in South America. So WISRN, as I started off my presentation with, as an organization, is now 36 years old, and we've really progressed from the early Atlas days when it was really based on shorebird science. What are the numbers? What are the habitats? To better engaging with people. So we've increased the participation of the Hemispheric Council from being those more science-based people to being more community-based people, because the success of the organization is in the buy-in from the people around those key shorebird habitats. And this is where we're getting into that concept that George was trying to instill in me, is that it's not really about shorebirds, because if you want to conserve habitats, you really need to have people supporting them to make sure that they're protected. And Wizard, in that sort of moving from just being that strict shorebird numbers sort of orientation, has really branched out in terms of engaging people in Latin America. And we're able to sort of combine the benefits of needing information on shorebirds with what do people locally also need information on. And this image here is an example of a project where we were able to combine resources for winter shorebird surveys with winter surveys for flamingos locally in Bolivia. So together we're able to survey more area by pooling resources, and Wizard's really helped doing that. And Wizard itself is a network, so the linking component of that is really critical. And I think we've been able to demonstrate that within the Bay of Fundy, because it's such a large area, that we're able to link, for example, the good work that's going on in Johnson's Mills with the work we're doing just across Shepherdie Bay in our protected area to make sure we're communicating back and forth, and then looking at how can we engage others to protect and consider more of the coastal habitats around the Bay of Fundy, but then also look at the Bay of Fundy as a unit and how can we together link up with other sites that share those same shorebird species to ensure that common messaging is being used throughout the bird's entire life cycle, from the Arctic through the Bay of Fundy down into South America. And then, of course, that buy-in from people outside of our current sort of focuses of conservation is really key. So getting a sense of stewardship in private landowners and other landowners is really critical. And of course, events like this, of course, are essential in bringing folks together. And this is the one image I could find of my presence at a previous Shorebirds and Sangria site. I think you can actually see my sangria glass there. These types of events are really great in getting the message out and encouraging others to learn and understand what's going on with this incredible resource that flows through Johnson's Mills and other parts of the Upper Bay of Fundy here. So with all this great work that's being done by Wizard and in the Upper Bay of Fundy, are we actually done yet? And I'll quickly run through a few examples of things where maybe that question really needs to be considered. And this is a picture of a semi-palmated sandpiper I took, I guess just a week ago now, on a little island in the eastern shore of Nova Scotia, and it was there together with 30 of its compatriots, and it got me thinking, well, here's a tiny island, not in an area we're used to seeing shorebirds come through, semi-palmated sandpipers especially. So are there more going through there that we don't know about? Be good to know. Of course, coastal habitats are not the only thing shorebirds rely on. So here are some greater and lesser yellowlegs roosting on a little habitat here at Sackville. But what other inland habitats should we be looking at as well? And the Maritime's definitely known to be a hotspot for shorebirds and shorebird conservation. But what about Newfoundland and Labrador? And this was a picture I took of sanderling and a dunlin on the northern tip of the island of Newfoundland last year, and it got me to thinking, wow, there's a bit of work to be done there as well. So the answer to are we done yet for shorebirds and conservation is no. There's lots of habitat still to be conserved and protected, lots of people that need to be engaged. So I think our job is really only just beginning.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Gary. And yeah, you're right. It is about people. And when you were talking, I was reminded of an event that you helped to facilitate. The Wishern Network helped to facilitate at Johnson's Mills. We are, of course, next to the small town of Dorchester, New Brunswick, who have gotten excited about the shorebirds in their backyards and have started holding a festival, a shorebird festival every year. And through the Wishern Network, we were actually able to bring some some community members from Dorchester, New Brunswick, down to Rhode Island to another Wishern site to meet some folks who have a shorebird festival there. And so it's great to have this network to make the links, not just between the scientists, the conservationists, as you say, but between the regular people who are inspired to protect these wild birds. Our next speaker is Miriam Yostro. She's been working in the forest and nature sector for 25 years. Since 2018, in addition to her regular position that you see there on the slide, she has also been a PhD candidate at Wageningen University and Research Center in the field of coastal protected areas governance in Suriname. Miriam, I will pass it over to you.
So, thank you, Paula, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I am Marie Jositro, and thank you all for joining this presentation. My presentation is on the wintering grounds of the semi-palmated sandpipers in Suriname. Let me introduce you to the coastal area of Suriname. The entire coast of Suriname is covered by the mangrove forest and has a length of about 400 kilometers. In addition, there are mudflats at some parts of the coastal area. The combination of mangrove forests and mudflats offers a breeding, feeding, and resting grounds for coastal birds. The area is also known for its rich fishing grounds and high biodiversity. It also includes nesting beaches for the migrating marine turtles. Due to the multiple land use in this area, many ministries have policies that apply in this area. The manager of all protected areas is the head of the Suriname Forest Service that falls under the Ministry of Land Policy and Forest Management. The migrating shorebirds have protected status, which means that they are not allowed to be hunted. In Suriname, there are 3 hotspots. Number 1, that's Bigipang Mima. Mima states for the multiple use management area, meaning that many economic activities are allowed in this area. Number 2 is the Kampanama Monding Nature Reserve. And number 3 is the Via Nature Reserve. The conservation activities in Suriname include law enforcement and education and outreach programs that are implemented in the coastal part of the districts Nikeri, Koroni, Saramacca, and Comawena. Research and monitoring have been conducted by foreign bird specialists, where birds are being counted, captured, banned, measured, weighed, and also feathers are collected for the purpose of the assessment of the abundance and distribution, and to evaluate energetic condition of the semi-palmated sandpipers. The aim of hunter training that will be implemented this year with David Mizrahi and a collaboration between the Ministry of Land Policy and Forest Management, and also the university is involved, is to train the hunters in different aspects of the nature conservation, what species can be hunted, which one are protected, and other stuff. The higher education course is a project of Manomet and the Ministry of Land Policy and Forest Management, and also the university is involved in this project, where students will be trained in shorebird ecology in habitat management, identification and content methods for the semi-palmated sandpipers. The wintering grounds in Suriname, how do they look like? Besides the semi-palmated sandpipers and other migrating shorebirds, you will see other bird species, among others, the red ibis, heron species such as the night blue and the three-colored herons, the Caribbean flamingos, and spoonbills. So we have many bird species occurring at the coast of Suriname, and it is really a bird bonanza. The wintering grounds, what are the birds eating? The mud contains small crustaceans such as shrimps, and they also eat worms. As long as it is low tide, the shorebird eats, even in the evening or early in the morning. At high tide, the shorebirds fly inland and rest or feed on the edges of water bodies. Threats, the climate change, adapting to potential impacts of climate change is a threat for these small creatures. Hunting that is illegal and unregulated has been a major serious problem in Suriname. Increased patrols by the game wardens have led to a decline in the number of offenses over previous years. And it has been shown that the patrols have led to less hunting of these semi-palmated sandpipers. Resource extraction includes, among others, oil drilling and large agricultural activities such as rice cultivation. Contaminant exposure in shorebirds can have an impact on the life cycle of birds. This is the end of my presentation. I want to thank you all for staying with me till the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mari. So wonderful to have you here to be speaking of where our birds are headed. Right now, in fact, they've been coming through the Bay of Fundy for quite a while. I wouldn't be surprised if some haven't already arrived. And I was really happy to see you talking about the variety of birds that you see. The semi-palmated sandpipers get a lot of attention here because, of course, they're the most numerous coming through the Bay of Fundy. But we definitely have a lot of other species coming through as well. Just to remind people, and I'm sure you're going to get a lot of questions on what you've just presented there. If people do have questions, we invite you to submit them. There's a little speech bubble with a question mark. You can click on that to get to the section where you can type in any questions that you have for the presenters. If you want to direct it to a specific, to one of our presenters, just add their name to it as well, and we'll get to those questions shortly. But before we do, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about the work that the Nature Conservancy of Canada is doing here in New Brunswick on the Bay of Fundy. And is that just going to look to my presenters here, my organizers here, to make sure that we're good to go? You can see my screen? Okay, excellent. So we're really honored to have Gary and Mari here with us to demonstrate the role of partnerships in conservation. And I also just want to take a minute to thank the thousands of donors who have helped to protect Johnson's Mills and the shorebirds that feed here, and really areas for migratory birds right across the country. We keep reinforcing this point about collaboration and partnerships because there is still so much to do. Migration is a key part of the conservation picture. we know that migration across the globe has been identified as an endangered phenomenon. Around the world, numbers of many migratory species are declining for reasons we are all too familiar with: habitat loss, exploitation, pollution, and climate change. And here in Canada, more than 400 bird species have a migration cycle, and the majority are reliant on multiple stopover locations, as we're hearing about today. Canada is home to 90 bird species that are currently considered at risk, and those with a migration cycle are even more vulnerable. Across the country, Nature Conservancy of Canada is working hard to protect land within identified important bird areas, migratory bird sanctuaries, to help these incredible migrants continue to make the voyage they have made for centuries. NCC is actively working in all 7 of the Wishern network sites in Canada. And as Gary mentioned, the Bay of Fundy was the second site established in the network and the first here in Canada. And NCC was really proud of the role that we played in the expansion of the site in 2019. Since 1994, NCC has been working with willing landowners at Johnson's Mills to acquire critical shoreline properties. And currently, we're responsible for 26 properties at this site, and we hope in future to protect the remaining portions of coast that these shorebirds depend on to rest and prepare for their long voyage south. And you can see them resting on the beach here at high tide. Protecting these coastal areas, the shoreline, also means that we're protecting the mudflats that can stretch for more than 2 kilometers into these inner Bay of Fundy bays. So by protecting this land on the coastline of Johnson's Mills, we're also protecting the critical feeding grounds. And you saw this map just a few minutes ago when Gary was talking about the expansion of the Wishern site in the Bay of Fundy. NCC worked with communities and conservation groups in 2018 and 2019 to raise awareness of new research on where the birds were feeding and roosting. And you can see some stars indicating the known important roosting sites for the shorebirds around the bay. So as Gary mentioned, it's not just these Sheppity Bay sites now. We know that they are in many locations around the bay. We were successful, as Gary mentioned, in getting the sites expanded to include the Cumberland and Cobequid Basin, in addition to the existing Wishern areas identified in Minas and Sheppity Bay, where Johnson's Mills and Mary's Point, the Canadian Wildlife Service protected site, are. And this designation will help inform future conservation actions, including areas where additional lands might be protected by Nature Conservancy of Canada, but also actions that government agencies and other conservation groups can do to ensure that while these birds are in their Canadian portion of their journey, we're doing all we can to protect them. And as we've mentioned numerous times, the reality is that the work that we're doing is not just about the shorebirds, it's about the people too. And for over 20 years, the Nature Conservancy of Canada's Johnson's Mills Shorebird Interpretation Centre has been educating visitors on how to observe this magnificent migration without disturbing the birds. This has also provided a first conservation job to many students over the years, many of whom have gone on to pursue careers in science and conservation. And you can see here our fantastic group of interns from the 2021 season. Having seasonal staff on site has allowed us to collect 20 years of data on the shorebird migration, and also to assist with the numerous scientific studies, many of which are ongoing. Including the banding of the birds that has led to a lot of the understanding that we have today. All of this helps to inform the conservation work that is still urgently needed as shorebird numbers globally are continuing to decline. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the work of one of NCC's longest serving staff member, Linda Stevenson, who is on my right in the Nature Conservancy shirt. I'm not sure if it's flipped on your screens, but she pretty much single-handedly made the Interpretation Center a reality over 20 years ago, and she is retiring this fall after 23 years with Nature Conservancy of Canada. So we just wanted to give a shout out to her. From the onset, she and the team realized that we couldn't protect the birds without having interpreters on site during the peak migration season to let visitors know about the importance of keeping shorebirds safe. And there is another legend of shorebird protection in Canada sitting beside Linda in this picture, and that is Mary Micah, who really pushed for the area on the other side of the bay to be protected at Mary's Point. Many think it's named after her. That's just a coincidence, but it is certainly synonymous with her, and she did a tremendous amount of work over her lifetime to protect shorebirds as they move through the Bay of Fundy. I know we are all proud of the work we do here in Atlantic Canada and across the country, and listening to Gary and Murray, I'm again reminded how connected we all are through shorebirds and through the desire to protect the natural world, because we can't protect migratory birds alone. Every stop on the journey is critical for their survival, and protecting them protects many other species, along with the joy that these natural areas bring all of us. Canada is privileged to be custodians of some of the world's most vital natural resources. By protecting precious places across the country, like Johnson's Mills, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, our partners and our donors together are giving back not just to our backyard, but to the world. And with that, we are going to move into our question and answer period of the evening. We have several questions for speakers that have been submitted by the audience. Again, if you have a question and you haven't gotten it in yet, feel free to enter it, and we'll get to as many of them as we can this evening. So I just need to get myself back up to the top of our list. We've got quite a few questions have come in already. And the first one is from Jerry, who says, I noticed a number of shorebird preservation organizations in landlocked areas. Or maybe, yeah. Which shorebirds, or do all of them, make use of landlocked protected habitats? So maybe that means not close to the shore. And Gary, you mentioned that in your presentation.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And, you know, certainly we notice a lot of semi-palmated sandpipers and other shorebirds migrating through Atlantic Canada on their southbound migration, but we don't see them coming up north. And what a lot of shorebirds do is sort of a loop migration from north to south and then back north again. Whereas in the spring, a lot of species tend to travel through North America more inland. So semi-palmated sandpipers and other birds will travel up from North America and make landfall on the eastern seaboard of the United States. And then from there will migrate sort of north and maybe swing a little bit west as they fan out across their entire distribution, breeding distribution, as I mentioned in my presentation, from Alaska all the way across to Nunatsiavut in Labrador. So it's basically inland during the spring, along the coast during the fall.
Great, thank you. Next question is an interesting one. It's an anonymous submission who's somebody saying, I'm always curious when they fly, even for a short distance, they always seem to fly in the same direction. I guess I've noticed that too with shorebirds. Or maybe it's that they all take off and go together, but is there a reason for that? Murray, is there anything that you want to say about just how the birds fly together, or do they always go in the same direction?
I don't know the answer to that, but yes, I have observed that the birds are flying together, and I think it's to protect themselves from predators. If they are together, they if we as people also are together, fighting together, then we will be stronger. And if there is any attack, then we will survive better. I think in the kingdom of animals, that is maybe the clarification, but maybe Gary can give an answer to that question.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job there. I think you're right. You're right on the money. Avoiding predators and just sort of acting as a organism unto itself, as I think you mentioned earlier, Paula, is a survival tactic on their part.
This next one is definitely for Gary, because you mentioned, this is from Michelle, who says you referred to the sandpiper eating a species that has been introduced, and you mentioned it was invasive. Does that mean that the sandpipers have only been stopping here since the time of Champlain? Also, does this invasive species harm any native species in the area?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, you know, certainly we don't really know what the sandpipers were doing at the time of Champlain, but, you know, up until very recently, we thought that the shorebirds were feeding almost exclusively on the Chorophium amphipods, the little shrimp-like organisms in the mud. And then it was only just a few years ago we learned that probably about half their diet is coming from those Chorophium, but the other half is coming from the biofilm that's on the surface of the mud. So my guess, because we really don't know, is that the birds would have just eaten mostly biofilm on their way through. So probably the Bay of Fundy has been a hot spot since the glaciers retreated and the shorebirds have figured out that food resource is there, and they're sort of benefiting from the effects of that introduced species by having that additional food source now.
Right, yes. We can't go back in time and see then, I guess.
Yeah, too bad. That would be fun.
Next one is for Mari. It's from Mark, and this is an interesting question to me too. Do the people in Suriname wonder where the sandpipers go like we do here in Canada? Or is there much awareness about the fact that these are migratory birds and where they go?
Yes, there is enough awareness due to the school programs we have in the past years, and school children knows that migrating birds will go away for months and then will come back. But as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, Suriname is really a bird bonanza. So you have many species here occurring at the coast, and the school children, the people, the local people, in fact, many people, the community of Suriname is very aware that they migrate to the north and will come back in a couple of months. And they also know that on average, the shorebirds is staying 8 months in Suriname. And some of the Surinamese consider these birds as birds of Suriname. But, you know, and other people say like, yeah, okay, we share the birds together. But some of us say like, if they stay so long in Suriname, they are actually birds of Suriname. But they are very aware. Yeah.
That's great. And there's another question here for you. It's an anonymous one, and this is one that I thought we would get. Why are the birds hunted there? Is it sport, food? What is the reason for the hunting?
So I really have never tasted how delicious they are, but I heard people say that the meat is very tasty, and in Suriname they are protected, but in our neighbor country they are not protected. So if it's very difficult for them to hunt them in Suriname, then they will go to the neighbor countries. So it's important that in fact countries work together to protect these birds, because if you protect one part and you don't protect the other part, then you see that decline will still occur, and then that will affect the global population, the total population. But they do it because the meat is very tasty.
Yeah, I have heard that too. I can't imagine they're so tiny, but I know that there was a time that they were hunted in Canada as well. Gary, I don't know if you have any knowledge of that or want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I'm actually not exactly up on that topic, so I don't have anything to add. Sorry.
I think it was a very long time ago here, though. It's culturally, it's not really happening at all now.
Yeah, I do know that they do have a sandpiper stew at the Dorchester Shorebird Festival, but I'm pretty sure there are no actual sandpipers in there.
Can confirm there are not, but it does address that history, that cultural history of use.
Yeah.
So the next question is from Lynn. Do the birds that migrate south in winter return to the same nesting sites on their return in spring? And if so, when do they usually return in spring? Gary, I guess that would be you with the Arctic question.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, over the years, we've banded a lot of shorebirds, and more recently, we've been able to attach little recording devices on them to get a better sense of where they specifically go. And there's been a project ongoing in northern Hudson Bay, both on Coates Island and Southampton Island, just to get a sense of what the shorebirds are doing in general. But because a number of semi-palmated sandpipers have been banded, they've discovered that some of those birds are actually coming back to the same areas, not necessarily to the same exact nesting sites, but they will use the same area. And I say some because we really don't have a clear picture of what they're all doing. So maybe there's a tendency towards that, but you know, shorebirds tend to react to environmental conditions as well. So if a breeding site is not suitable one year, they might abandon that and move to somewhere else the next year.
Right, okay. And the next question is from Mary Lou. What percentage of the migrating birds actually make it to their wintering grounds? How does the latest data compare with previous years? I'm not sure which of you wants to tackle that, or if you have specific information, or we know this. Yeah,
I think generally there's a lot of questions out there that we can't definitively say, but I know from year to year the number of birds that will make it from the Bay of Fundy to Suriname varies based on the conditions of the birds when they leave the Bay of Fundy and what they encounter along the way. So how many storms are they going to encounter, that sort of thing. So it really does vary from year to year. And then, sorry, what was the second half of that question?
Well, it was how does the latest data compare with previous years? So I guess maybe has there been a change recently?
Yeah, and from what we observe in the Bay of Fundy, that's a really interesting question because you know, we're detecting changes in the way that shorebirds move through the Bay of Fundy. They used to come through in a big pulse, so we get this few birds showing up, then all of a sudden there's hundreds of thousands of them, and then they would leave to go to Suriname for where they spend most of the year. But now we're noticing that period is extending, and birds tend to occur in smaller flocks. And there are a number of theories about why that's happening. And, you know, recovering peregrine populations, which are preying on the shorebirds when they come through, is likely changing their behavior and how they use the habitats in the Bay of Fundy. But certainly, you know, climate change is affecting not only the timing of the cycle, but sort of how birds are able to feed and what condition they're in through time. So the numbers are shifting, and it makes it really hard because we can't be everywhere, and because their behaviors is changing. You know, we're not 100% confident on our understanding of the numbers, but there is enough of a signal to indicate that there is a decline through time of the number of semi-palmated sandpipers migrating south each year. So we're currently looking at that to see whether or not they would qualify for, say, species at risk designation, that sort of thing. And I don't know, Marie, if you are detecting similar things down in Suriname in terms of numbers of birds arriving there from the Bay of Fundy.
According to the data, but not collected by me, but by bird specialists from abroad, like I said, because mainly foreigners are doing research in Suriname, and we want to change that in the future, but we are not there yet. But there are studies, and especially David Misrahi has studied, has done research in Suriname, and according to his report, there is a decline. But then it is not only for Suriname, but then overall the South region, the South America region. So that it includes Suriname as well, but there is a decline in the numbers. Yeah. Then there is a lot to study here in Suriname. So maybe in the future, if there are funds and foreigners, researchers that are interested in coming to Suriname and study, then it will have a spin-off effect. It's not only we will gather data to protect the shorebirds, but also doing capacity building for our community in Suriname. Yeah.
We have a fairly large question by Claire. So, oh no, and I see that this is going to be our last question, which is unfortunate because we've got lots more great questions here. Thank you all for your wonderful questions. But the last word will go to Claire, who is kind of building on what we were just talking about. She's saying the large groups of resting shorebirds seem like they'd be an easy meal for birds of prey, both in New Brunswick and Suriname. How much of a threat are raptors for them? Gary, you'd mentioned the peregrine. So you could speak to that, but then for Mari, she says, I'm also wondering if Suriname has alligators or crocodiles that would be threats to shorebirds when they go inland at high tide. So maybe we'll start with Gary with the raptors and then go to Suriname.
Okay. Yeah, certainly. You know, I was really struck one year after I visited Johnson's Mills and a peregrine had come through and scattered the birds and they were all gone. It was sort of like, oh, well, that was the end of my shorebirds for the day. And I went down the coast a little bit to a place called Cap Maringouin, which is French for mosquito cape, which is, especially this time of year, there are a lot of them there. But I was really surprised. At one point, I was hiking along and I looked down on a rocky beach, and it took me a couple of minutes to realize that it wasn't actually rocks that I was looking at, it was the backs of shorebirds. And they are so well camouflaged when they're roosting that, you know, if they hang tight and don't react to things happening around them, like raptors flying above, they can be pretty safe there. So, you know, the adaptation they have in the dark mottled coloration on their backs really does blend them into the beach. So while we do have recovering raptor populations, their plumage is always something that helps them stay safe at high tide when they're all collected in, like the image you had in your presentation, Paula. They just look like rocks on the beach.
Yeah, for sure. And how about Suriname? Predators there? Maybe alligators?
No, not what I'm aware of. I've never heard about alligators or crocodiles that are threats, but when they fly inland at high tide, this is the, how do you say, that is the time when hunters then will catch them. Yeah. By hundreds if using a wire when they do that. So they know at high tide they will fly inland and then they will make use of the situation.
Right. So yeah. much bigger predator there than the wildlife. Okay, well, sorry that we ran out of time to get to all the questions. Some wonderful questions there. And if you really want to still pursue to get an answer, we could try to get to them. If you want to just send them to the email that's up on the screen, events@natureconservancy.ca. If you had some other questions that you really wanted to learn about, you can send to that email, and we will get back to you as quickly as we can. I hope this has inspired you to learn more. And if you do want to learn more and see some incredible images and follow the migration story of one individual semi-palmated sandpiper, there's an incredible online presentation that was prepared for the Wishern Hemispheric Shorebird Reserve Network. And you can find it by following the link that's on screen, natureconservancy.ca/shorebirds. That'll link you over to that Wishern presentation story map online, and it's really incredible. There were also some people asking if we could play the video again. I don't think we have time to do that now, but what we can do is send it out with the information. You'll get a link following this if you want to watch the presentation again, and I think we can probably put a link to a video in there so that if you didn't see them at the start, you can see those shorebirds flying together, doing their ballet in the Bay of Fundy. And so with that, we are going to close off with Kevin McNamara, who's a longtime volunteer with NCC, who's currently the chair of the Atlantic Regional Board and a member of the Board of Directors. And he's just going to give us a few words to close out our event tonight. Thank you.
On behalf of the Nature Conservancy of Canada, we can't thank our donors and partners enough. The success of conservation really is a collective effort, and you inspire us to do more and better conservation. Today, not only did I learn about semi-palmated pipers, the incredible biodiversity of Suriname, and the unbelievable migration of their mighty journeys, but today also reminded me of the importance of our work, not just here in our own backyard in Canada, but internationally. What we conserve and care for together is having generational and global impacts, and it wouldn't be done without our incredible donors. A big thank you to the Nature Conservancy of Canada donors. I would also like to thank our featured speakers, Gary, Miriam, and Paula, for sharing their expertise and all the incredible work that they're leading to protect nature. Thank you all for attending Shorebirds and Sangria. Until we meet again.